Horror. Fear.
Cold. And hunted.
Terror.
Stop! Mom, please stop! Mom, I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry! Mommy, please, I'm begging you. I'm begging you to stop.
All three synonyms of a feeling that everyone experiences at some point in time. Whether it be a scary movie you watched over at a friend's sleepover, or the time you got sleep paralysis and the Hat Man came to visit you in the middle of the night. This somewhat addicting feeling is a shared experience that all of humanity will have to go through at some point in time, whether it be willingly or forcefully. That being said, today I'll bring you into the midst of horror culture to discuss why several of the video games that we see today seem to consistently suck ass. But more specifically, why did the much anticipated Texas Chainsaw Massacre the game fail to live up to fan and critic expectations? But more importantly than that, can you survive Michael Jackson? So, the entirety of TCM revolves around two teams, the family and the survivors. The family must hunt down the survivors using various powers and abilities that are unique to each of the family members. For example, our lone hero here, Mr. Leatherface. As you can tell by Leatherface's appearance, he's the bronze of the family, but doesn't really have a lot going on upstairs.
Spell red.
L-S-T-E-R.
Unlike our counterpart, the Cook. The Cook is slow, weak, and clumsy, but is quick with his wits, using padlocks to filter out certain areas of the map to make it easier to hunt down and kill their victims. Speaking of survivors, they must take on the task of activating key locations such as generators, fuse boxes, and other specialty locations. All the while try to keep a low profile and try to keep as quiet as possible, as not to alert the psychopaths that roam the very same map. If the survivors can use their cunning hyperintelligence to activate all key locations, then the survivors live to see another day. If they don't, well... This sounds somewhat familiar, right? This back and forth of hunted versus hunters. Feel like we might have seen this before, but I wonder where. A quick Google search might help us. Ah yes, the oh so similar Madden 2024. I knew I've seen this before, but what are these other titles? Dead by Daylight, Friday the 13th, Ash vs Evil Dead? Never heard of them. How similar could they even be? Very similar. That's because they are TCM. Or rather, TCM is them. Or they all are the same thing. But it is safe to say there's a shocking similarity between all of these titles. But how did we get such drastically similar games with completely separate franchises and plots that surround the story and the lore behind the characters and their motivations? Well, more on that in a second. First, we should discuss something more important, a question that has complexed humans for eons. Who's to blame? If we seek to point fingers at anyone but ourselves, because what are we supposed to do, take responsibility? Pshaw. No, we should look at Sumo Digital, the developers behind Texas Chainsaw Massacre, well, the game. If we were to look at Sumo Digital's other titles and see what they've produced in the past, maybe that'll give us better insight into TCM. First off, Little Big Planet 3, one of the most popular titles on PS3 and PS4. Wow, that is a huge step down from their previous works. I mean, I'm befuddled. I don't know what to say. Maybe if we look at some of their newer titles, that will give us better insight in what they've actually created. Let's see. In 2019, they dropped... Oh, yuck. That's right. The individuals in charge of creating a game for one of the greatest horror series we've ever seen in human history were also in charge of creating a sequel for one of the most beloved games in console history. No wonder TCM shit the bed so hard. It was never their fault to begin with. It was all theirs. Though, it might not be entirely Sumo Digital's fault. Whether it was an internal or an external source influencing the game's creation, it seems to show they have an inability for creating something fresh, something unique, and this is one of the reasons that TCM the game was so bad. This lack of creativity is where I feel a lot of the fans and individuals felt betrayed. A title synonymous with being the father of horror, a title that brought upon an entire subgenre of horror into an existence, a title such as The Texas Chainsaw Massacre gets shafted with a B-rate company, with a B-rate idea for a game, all the while charging for a AAA title. I mean, I'm a little less shocked at the price in 2023. I mean, McChickens aren't even $1 anymore. But the question still remains. Why and how could this happen to such a great title? Why can't we just get something original for once? So yet again, I ask why. Why did this happen to me? But more importantly, why does this keep happening within the horror genre? Why do these titles keep being the same redundant piece of garbage? Within the horror genre, there are three distinct pathways most studios choose to follow. Number one, companies typically choose to go with the standard horror tropes. The standard long pause, then jump scare.
What?
Very basic but effective. This pathway is just the standard American family horror. Number 2, develop a story that enriches and builds around horror as a whole, using the medium to discuss deep-seated fears and hate of man, while also talking about deep-seated political issues, too hot to talk about or too complex to discuss through normal means. But lastly, and worst of all, number 3, capitalized horror. A pathway many large and small studios choose to go down. A pathway that seeks to use the term horror for fast cash, putting very little time and effort into what they're creating. All they have is short-term views of profit, no matter who it steps on. If I were to choose a piece of media that exemplifies the third option the best, I don't know what I would choose, but maybe Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, released August 22nd, 1986, the direct sequel of the cult classic Texas Chainsaw Massacre? What? This is so odd. How could I have even thought of that? This is so peculiar. I mean, if this is the example that I was given, I mean, I guess I'll have to use it. So, within short summary, TCM2 was bad. Like, really bad. The release of TCM2 was, and still is, very controversial. Not only because of the bad plot and bad editing, horrible acting, no, all of those sucked within their own rights, but that wasn't the worst of all. The worst was the message that TCM2 brought. You see, the original TCM was a conversational piece discussing the current economic and political fallout of the Reagan administration had at the time. The OG TCM sought to demonstrate the destructive nature of Reagan's policies regarding the Midwest and rural families, albeit in a much more gruesome fashion. Though the movie is based in horror through and through, the overall message of the horrors of American conservatism within rural America was still a present and well-thought backbone that supported this movie through the beginning and end. TCM2, on the other hand, well, TCM2 tried very heavy to demonstrate the destructive behavior of male masculinity by using the movie's dark humor and antiquated responses to men's excessive use of violence, gore, and hypersexualization. And yes, I know, it's a very drastic turn from the original. Though I wonder why a studio would use a movie that depicts the drastic effects that politics had on rural families during the 1970s as a contrary piece on hyper-violent and gore within media, even though the horror aspect was just as important as the movie's overall message. I wonder why they would ever choose a movie like that. Oh, I see. It was for the money. You see, this is the issue. This is why horror games are so bad. This is why we couldn't have had a good Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This is why you can't survive Michael Jackson. Capitalized horror. A contradiction to horror as a whole. Something that does not seek to be scary, rather something that seeks to be called horror for the financial benefits that horror can bring in. That's the issue I have with Texas Chainsaw Massacre the game. This is why people hated Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. This is why modern horror titles blow ass cheeks. Capitalized and industrialized horror that seeks the financial benefits that horror titles can bring in, all the while offering nothing to the hypothetical horror table. This is, in my opinion, the epitome of horror culture, and this is the tipping point that will phase out horror as a genre. Capitalized and industrialized horror seeks to manufacture a simple idea that can be cut and pasted over and over and over again until our corporate overlords milk these titles dry. The horror genre will remain one of the most important and influential genres to exist within our culture. Whether it's the controversial topics that can't be talked about within normal media, or an expressive take that seeks to take non-literary standpoints on hot topics, the horror genre is a much-needed piece of media and storytelling. But manufactured horror seeks to undermine this expressive nature by flooding the market with B-rate projects that cost very little but can be sold at ludicrous amounts of money, that seek to copy and paste the same idea over and over and over again for a cheap dollar. These industry-planted products only seek to undermine the true art form that horror is, by tainting its reputation with cheap tricks and fast dollars, destroying a legacy many individuals sought to build from the ground up. Without stopping these cash cows, we may lose sight and remembrance of what horror means to us and what it means to our culture, because if we continue down this pathway, we may see the destruction of every piece of beloved horror media ever created. Soon there will be nothing left untainted in this genre. Soon there will be a void where the horror genre once stood proudly, filled with nothing more than Roblox obbies and the 70-second Five Nights at Freddy's. So with that being said, instead of buying that $60 game from the big name company, maybe try something local. Try something artisanal. Why not try out an indie dev for once? Someone you know who truly cares about their art form. If not for the art form, then do it for me, your best buddy old pal, Plastic Cup. If we do that, who knows? There might be some integrity left within us.
That's integrity. Those other guys, no integrity. Do you want some fucking integrity? Don't you wish everyone had some goddamn integrity? Well, soon, everyone can. Integrity weed.
Hey, thank you for making it this far into the video, and I hope you enjoyed. This topic was pretty fun for me to actually make. I myself am a big horror fan. I don't know about any of you guys, but it is one of my favorite genres. The inspiration of this came from, as I mentioned before, the TCM game that just dropped not too long ago, and how unbelievably bad it was. It's so undeniably similar to a lot of the other horror games that we see today, which is so odd because Texas Chainsaw Massacre was a revolutionary title that revitalized horror as a whole within media, and having a company come out and brandish this as a Texas Chainsaw Massacre game is so unbelievably sad. This title deserves so much more, at least more than a Dead by Daylight clone. With that being said, thank you guys yet again for watching. Also, if you guys have any interest, I plan on doing a horror stream over on Twitch towards the end of October. Probably late on a Saturday or Sunday, I still don't know yet. But if that's any interest, twitch.com/plastic cup. Anyways, have a good October, drive safe, and maybe text the creepy guy back on Instagram. He just wants to link up.
Shall we?
Very well.
Excellent.